Okay, so Evolution MX, as we're looking at now, has for some time incorporated the purchase ledger invoice register. Now, we're not assuming you've any prior knowledge of that either today, so I will be going over some of the functionality that those of you already familiar with it or using it will already know about. So the subcontractor invoice register sits inside, unsurprisingly, the subcontractor's ledger. It allows for the receipt of invoices to be dealt with by an incoming email address. Now, this email address is whatever you choose it to be. It would make logical sense for it to be a dedicated email address, and perhaps one which is dedicated specifically to subcontractors, although it is possible to share the same email address with your suppliers' incoming emails. The reason we say it makes sense for it to be a dedicated email address is so that you are furnishing the queue of things to do with those that are going to be an invoice rather than other correspondence and other documentation. It's not the end of the world by any means if other stuff does arrive on this queue, because you can always forward or remove it from the queue yourself anyway. But it just makes logical sense for it to be something that's more of a dedicated function. What the invoice register will do, therefore, is it will replace the need for any printing of emails that come in that you end up having to scan and then electronically and or manually file away in the system. It also replaces the need for anybody who's using the barcode functionality for subcontractor invoices within Evolution M currently. Now, you can access the system through its own menu. So you've got options for what we're calling unprocessed invoices, could be showing you everything that's so far arrived into the queue, whether that be via email directly, whether it be forwarded on from another email address, whether it be scanned and directed to an email address, or even dragged and dropped. So if you've got something that you've stored already on your desktop, for example, as is the example with the one that's being shown there, that has no email from address, so I've just dragged and dropped that into the queue. So that could be a shortcut way of you being able to do something you've already received and stored without having to send it back out through email. Now, as well as having the option for menus, we've also got the ability to have dashboards. Now, those of you already using Evolution MX will be familiar with dashboards potentially. You may have even configured some of your own. This is purely an example of what the dashboard could give you. It's a functioning dashboard, but it's also providing statistical and other information. So across the top, I've got some tiles of what you can do or are doing or need to do in relation to the subcontractor invoices. So these are completely configured to be account of whatever actions are required. From the tiles, you can drill down into the detail that's sitting beneath them. So it negates the need to necessarily use a menu to navigate your way around the system. Other tiles I've got there at the bottom, the larger ones, are providing me with reporting style information based upon my subcontractor's ledger generally. We're not saying by any means dashboards have to all be to do with the same function. You can have a combination of different ledgers and different ideas on the same dashboard, and they are all completely configurable by you. The top right-hand corner gives you the option to go into the configuration. Again, I'm not going to spend too much time on the dashboards themselves, though that is the subject of other webinars that we've done, and we'd be delighted to give you more information on those or entertain the idea of going through that with you on a one-to-one basis. So let's get the system running. So I've got in my queue so far, I've just got one item. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to send myself an email just to get something added to that queue. So using a small local email client that I've got, I'm going to fire off an email to that queue. As I say, it's up to you what this is. It's entirely up to you what the address is. I've actually got a separate email address that's used for subcontractors as opposed to the one that I'm using for purchasing. But as I say, there's no reason why you can't necessarily share the same email address, particularly if it's going to be the same person who's doing both kinds of invoices. So to that email address, I'm going to be sending a message. I'm going to be attaching to the email a number of attachments. Now, it won't matter whether your supplier sends you PDFs or JPEGs or TIFF files. It won't matter whether they are single or multi-page. We'll see what we can do with those when I send this through to the email. So all I'm doing is I'm sending that with, in this case, 3 separate attachments through to my designated email address. That will then be picked up by the system. You can obviously see already in the background, my dashboard tile has refreshed itself to say you've now got 4 things to do. So if I click on that list, we'll now be able to see, in addition to the one that was there previously, we've now got a number of other items that have been added that give you the ability to process or do something with at this point. Okay, so the 3 attachments have come in. They have come from the same email, but they're assumed to be at least 3 separate invoices. Now, what we can do with the items that are already on there, item number 32 that's being shown, I can identify immediately that it's actually multi-page. So we can see the drop down there is indicating there are 2 pages as part of this one attachment. And that might be a legitimate 2-page invoice, or it might be that, as is the case here, I need to actually split this out because it's 2 separate invoices. So dive into the item, identify that page 1 is for invoice number 1240, skip to page 2, we can see it's another invoice number. So what we can do there is we can just go back to page 1, hit the save button, and it will ask you if you want to split. So I'll say, yes, I need it to split. So I've now got an extra item added to my queue, and I can isolate both of those attachments as separate entities. Other things that might happen in a housekeeping view here is you may get things that you don't actually want to deal with on the invoicing queue. So there may be duplicates, for example. This top one I've got, I dragged and dropped it, not realizing that the same invoice had already come in separately on another of the items that we've got on the queue. So what I can do with those ones is I can click into it and I can just mark it at the top there as invalid, telling the system not to expect any further action from that. As I return back to my dashboard, my count of items requiring direct action will be revisited. So I've now got 4 things I need to do. I'm also keeping a tag on those items that I have marked as invalid. So if at any point I needed to, the silver grey tile would give me access to show me everything that had come in that had been marked that way. Okay, now let's go in and start posting something. So from my to-do list, if I go into item number 34, now my system, as I said, has been set up to expect all invoices to be of a subcontractor nature. Therefore, the creditor type that's shown on the right-hand side is non-selectable. If you're sharing an email address, and you want to be able to process either or both types of invoices, then we can enable it so that the same menu option takes you in and allows you to select here on the creditor type, and then you indicate it's a supplier or it's a subcontractor, simple as that. So with ID 34, I can see the clear image of the item on the left-hand side being represented to me. I'm then able to use the right-hand side of the screen to make my entries. Going into the subcontractor field, you can browse on all your subcontractors, enabling you to search for them on any format that you want in terms of the different fields that you've got. You can also control the fields that are being shown. So what you've got there displayed alongside each of my subcontractors is purely an illustration of what you could have. You can actually use a configuration option, it's a bit like a report writer really, to be able to choose the fields that you actually want to have present on the screen, and therefore assisting you with the selection and the searching. So you don't necessarily have to go into the searching. If you just want to start typing, the system will go into auto search mode for you anyway and allow you to select the subcontractor you wish. Alongside this particular subcontractor, we've got a yellow warning triangle indicating that on this occasion, the insurance has expired for that subcontractor. So those sort of checks are being maintained by the system as you go through. On the order number, we can now browse through the orders that are sitting against that subcontractor. Now, Evolution MX is driven by subcontractor orders, whether those are created through the purchase ordering module, or whether those that you create manually through the subcontractor order maintenance, or a combination of the two. So it will give rise to you being able to select the purchase order that you want to use as the basis for this invoice. Down at the bottom, I've got a new order number, which was raised through purchase ordering instantly against my contract number 1035. So if I load that, that will access the details associated with that particular order. I can use Ref2 then to record the supplier's invoice number. No need for Ref1. The system will take care of that on an automatic allocation basis just to keep your order up to date. And then you're able to make an entry of the net figure associated with the invoice that's being claimed. So if all I'm going to do is record the value, and then I can go into the show cost allocation, which will open up the lines of that purchase order or that order that I'm able to allocate that £300 against. So 300 being allocated against the makeup of the purchase order, in this case made up of lines of materials and work separately. This would be based upon the work categories that you've used in the creation of the order in the first place. Now on this screen, I've highlighted in yellow the fields that are going to allow or require input. Now you can configure this screen to suit however you want it to look. So if you're never involved in retention or discount, then those columns can be completely removed. you can use the plus icon again to include whatever fields of data that you want. So those that are showing as ticked in the left-hand side are being included on my display. Anything else that you may find of interest or of use could be added to the display. You can place it wherever you like it to go. It doesn't have to be in the column order that we've got there. If you want to shift columns around, then you're quite at liberty to do so. And you can also save the view, maybe personally for your own requirements. If there's a number of you all doing the same invoicing and different people require or want different views, then you can have multiple different ways of looking at the same information and then choose your own personal preference. Okay, I've used a formatting option here to color code, as I said, in yellow, the fields, just to highlight the ones that I could make entries to if I wanted to. A bit like those that you see within Evolution M Classic, if you like, where you've got the grayed out fields aren't requiring input, they're just there for information, but the white highlighted fields allow you to make the entry. So at this point, I can make an entry against any or all of those lines that are being shown. So just by double clicking on the line, we can say that we're going to allow for 100 on that particular line. That then reduces my to allocate figure. Maybe I'll put 200 against the following line. Okay, if you're at all interested, you can always show what's happening in the background. The show hide analysis button can be used just to give an indication as to what's been happening in the background behind those lines of detail, should you wish to show that. That can be turned on all the time just to give you an indication where it's going to in terms of the cost head and the analysis, or just hidden from view and then accessible should you wish to. Okay, at this point then, I may want to just post that. Just before I do so, I'm going to take an opportunity to scribble on the invoice. Now, with it not being a physical invoice, I can't physically do that, but I might just want to add a note to it just to give an indication of what it's for. Okay. That's a sticky note that will apply now to the document and appear over it when the document is retrieved from anywhere in the system. So at this point, if I then just submit, that's doing the final checks just to make sure that the allocate value is down to 0. It's then going to do the updating through to my subcontractor's ledger, update the job costing, and also then remove it from the to-do list. So I'm able to then carry on with others that are waiting in the queue. Okay, now other things that you can do from the queue. If I was calling up on an item that I find I'm not actually sure entirely what to do with, so I can see it sitting there as requiring processing. So I can take the opportunity here to record as much information as I wish or need to against that entry. The beauty of the invoice register functionality is it's not done until you say it's done. So if you want to be able to record information in part and then maybe just save the item, that's not going to lose what you've done so far, and neither is it going to post it through to the system until you're ready to do so. So returning to it, it'll remember the information you've done so far. That gives you the opportunity to potentially change dates and to change subcontractors, change values before you actually fully submit the item through to the ledger. Now, at this point, I may be unclear about the order that I need to place this invoice against. So I could record the details that I can see on screen, but maybe I need to make a note there just to say what job or what order. Okay, now it may be that I can find that out, so I may just save it and come back to it later when I've found out the remaining information, or I can take the opportunity to use the query function, which is part of the invoice register, just to place it on query to say, well, for the moment, I can't actually fulfill the entry of that particular invoice, so I'm going to record notes and maybe pass it to another individual. Now, the people that appear on this list for users don't necessarily have to be users of Evolution MX. They just need to have been set up within the Evolution MX system with a recognition of maybe nothing more than an email address. So if you make a selection of somebody, it may be that they are going to visit Evolution MX and deal with the approval or the authorization themselves, but it could just be that they're going to receive an email because they're maybe out on site, but they are the best person to get information about this particular posting. So I'm going to make it available to myself just so as I can keep a tag on it as it goes through the system. For the time being, what will happen is that is removed from my to-do list because I've asked that to filter on all of those items that require direct action of some sort. Now that has been dealt with in part, and so I've moved it now over onto the pale blue tile just right of center of my dashboard display. And I can click into it from there. As the administrator, I can see what it is. And also if I click into it, we'll be able to see details of it so far entered and also full details of the query user. that query user was also being shown to me in the third column across, the approval user. Okay, so I know it's in the system knows it's there, it's not going to forget about it, but it's not requiring any action directly until I get the required information from the approver. Okay, now that approver could be sitting outside of Evolution MX, as I say, and may be able to receive emails that are coming through from the approval system. So dependent on the timing that we've got for the update of the approval items, they will be appearing into the inbox through Microsoft Outlook or your client. So just as I was speaking there, it managed to fulfill my requirement. So there it is. That's the one I've just sent off to myself as a result of putting it on query within inside Evolution MX. So it records the notes that I added as part of the email message, and it also, most importantly, includes the attachment of the document that's being referred to in the email. So as a recipient, I can call it up, I can see exactly what the invoice is. I may then be in a position to be able to answer the query. So all that needs to happen here is we can just reply to it, put in whatever information it is, and then send that. Now, this is all outside of Evolution MX, so this is why they don't need to be a user of the system. So it's coming back to me into my inbox because I was the one that sent it. So whoever sent the query will be the recipient of any reply to that, which means then that they are able to revisit Evolution MX, access the query list based upon the email responses that they've had, call up the item, be able to see it in the same detail that was seen by the person on site, perhaps take it off query at this stage, and then also be able to process it further. So we could key into the item just to see what we've got. We were told it was job 1035, it was 300, and we could go into the detail beneath that on the show cost allocation, where we're able to see that this has had previous invoices posted against it. So on this occasion, I can just go in and put the value against the associated line. It's checking against the order values to make sure that the order hasn't gone over in terms of what the order value was and now what is being invoiced. And it's giving you the indication there that the measured work category does actually exceed its budget of 1,000. So that's just an extra warning, really. Other than that, the to allocate is 0, so I can submit that, and that will go through and update the ledgers in the same way as the original did. Okay, but with intervention required. Now that's manual ad hoc intervention, and you as the administrator are receiving back into the to-do list things that need further action. So that's an option for you to be able to use where you're using it as and when you need to or want to. The other option you've got is to involve workflow. Now, workflow is more of an automated process, and also it doesn't require that you as the instigator of the workflow ever see that item again. So it's typically used for approval of payment, for example, for things to go through, where you as administrator are happy for them to go to the ledger, but they need to be seen or approved by somebody in authority to say, yeah, that's okay, that one can go through and onto the ledger. So what I'll do with that one, if I call that up again from the list, so another item that I've got there, number 33 this time, we can see that its values are considerably higher than what we've been seeing up till date. And that could be the trigger that formats the requirement for authorization through automated workflow. So it can be automatically based upon the value of the invoice. I'm just going to use ABC again, who've been troubling us with lots of invoices on this occasion. Selecting again from the order number, the job or the order that I want to post against. Recording also the other values that we've got as well, so the invoice number, and then maybe also the full value of the 13,000. Okay, now I could just let that go through the system and let automatic workflow pick up on it. So that's fine. I'm going to do that in a second, but I'm just going to show how you don't necessarily have to have automated workflow. You can have it so that any Tom, Dick or Harry could have a receipt of that to be approved. Well, you've chosen that these are workflows that will involve a particular individual, okay, and they could then receive our email. With this kind of workflow, if they receive an email, they can actually reply to that email with the word to approve, and then it can automatically update the approval status, which is different from what we saw with the query option we saw earlier. They can also call into the system themselves and see a queue of items. So if they're going to be somebody who could be receiving several emails in relation to individual invoices, they're not necessarily going to want that. You may not want that to happen. So we don't have to rely on the email side of things to have the approval working. So I'm going to leave that empty for the time being. I'm going to just go into show cost allocation just so that I can clear where that item needs to be allocated. So the 13 grand against that line. So I've got nothing left to allocate. If I now submit, it's the same option I used for posting. It will remove it from my to-do list because I've done everything I need to do at this stage. It has now passed through the system. It's been removed off my to process list, and it's actually moved into the submitted, distinctly different from the posted. So the posted has been updated with all of those that have actually gone through onto the ledger. The submitted will capture all of those that have gone into workflow. So we can see here that it's been submitted. We've got the indication status showing that. If we click into the item, we can see that the approval user it's gone to is MRW. Now, I didn't ask it to go there. It picked it up through automated workflow. You could, instead, if you wanted to, keep an eye on it and see who it's actually gone to from this list. So this is an option to involve other fields on there. So you could pick up on another item there to get the originator or the owner and have that available to be included. Okay, so your choice as to how the information is going to be there to support you. On this occasion, I've sent it for approval. So it's sitting in the approvals queue. It's also been sent to that individual. So it may have gone through email, maybe for them to approve it, or maybe just as a reminder. I've also got the approval menu option. Now, clearly I'm not MRW as a user, but I can be given proxy rights over approvals for that person if you want to. So that will save me in this occasion having to log out as my login to go in as MRW. I can look at the approval options and it will show me all of those that have been sent to me by proxy. Okay, now as the approver, I've got vision of the entire document. I've also got the option to add any text if I wanted to. So it may be that you just want to put on the fact that you've approved it, just as a scribble. That doesn't require anything else from that point. It can then just be approved. And that will be all that's required of it. Okay, that disappears off the approval list, flags the status as that invoice being approved. Okay, and then we'll also see it now moving from the submitted onto the posted. So my posted is really just a convenient way of me being able to keep an eye on everything that has passed through the ledger that's gone through. You'll notice that as I look at it, we've got clear indication of the notes that have been added to those documents. So that could be an easy way of you being able to check to make sure that the work's been done and those invoices have gone through. Other ways of being able to access the result of the posting could be through accessing further or fuller information on the dashboard. So if I use my bottom left tile there to draw up a list of all of my subcontractor transactions, where I've chosen to summarize these by subcontractor. So this is an example of the report writing capabilities of the analytics side of Evolution MX. Some of you may be familiar with that, but it means that you can be accessing the information in the format you wish. I've chosen to, for example, summarize or group all of the transactions by subcontractor, irrespective of the contract or the job that they relate to. Associated with each of the postings, I've got a number of different fields where I've chosen to include them, just as you saw me do earlier, and rearranging those columns in the order that I wish. But also I've got the paperclip, which is giving me clear and instant access to each of the documents that have been associated. So as you call into it, you can see the full image of the document. Any yellow sticky notes, as you hover over them, will give an indication of the date, time, and user of the approval of the adding of the notes. So if I was doing it by proxy, for example, it would be clear to everybody that it was me that did it rather than the original intended user. So all of those documents are available through your analytics function, but they are also available old school wise as well. So if you looked at the subcontractor inquiry, for example, through classic Evolution M, access through the MX interface, I could call up their ABC. I could dip into the particular order and then check on transactions against that, or look at all transactions for all orders, maybe sort them by date, so we can go in and see one of those that we've added. So there's 3 actions appearing, all as a result of what we've just been doing in the invoice register. If I double click on any one of those, we can see the full details of the values, just as you would through the normal processing of Evolution M-style invoices. but associated with that will be the document, which has been automatically captured through the invoice register and is then displayed on the screen. Okay, clearly as it was intended originally. Also, just to show you on maybe one of the other items, if I call that top one up, the document there gives you the document, but also will show you the overlay of the yellow sticky notes as well. So you get that wherever you're looking at the resulting invoice. Okay, so that concludes what we were going to look at today on the invoice register, specifically for subcontractors. I do hope that you found it of use and of interest and could be a benefit to the company. As we said before, any questions or observations, we'd like to hear from you on an individual basis. We'll be able to then reply to you. Anybody needs to see any element of this in more detail, or indeed anything else to do with Evolution MX, then we'd be delighted to entertain that with you on a one-to-one basis. But again, thanks very much for attending. Hope you find it of benefit, and I wish you a good day. Thanks very much. Bye now.